and today I'm continuing on with the following iteration of my visual novel route tier list. If you missed out on the last one and want to check it out, I should have the previous video linked in the description below, but honestly I wouldn't fault anyone that doesn't want to check it out, considering that was a 2.5 long video ranking like 100 something character routes. We will pick up from where we last off in this video, and I guess I'll go ahead and just relay off the same stipulations as last time. So I am still not going to be ranking any common routes, and then also am not going to be covering any sort of like chapters such as the doors and Fata Morgana. It's also not a waifu tier list, so don't think that it is. I'm going to try to not talk about spoilers too heavily for those that are going to be using this as a sort of like gauge on whether you would want to read any certain route. I'm going to go ahead and I'll show you guys where we left off and we can get right into it. So this was the list from last time. It was quite a lot, and this time I have 25 new routes to rank, as well as one other route that I must have missed last time. So I guess we can go ahead and do that real quick, which is Yume, the main girl from Hoshisora no Momoria. I've gone on record saying that I feel like it kind of is a letdown because the whole point of the game is to find this heroine, and by the time that you get to her, it doesn't feel like, I don't know, it doesn't live up to the expectations. I would have to say, it's gonna be kind of weird putting it in the middle of like some of these like placements. I want to say I could probably put it like somewhere like right around here in C tier. Now let's get into the all new stuff, and I guess I will start with instead of probably jumping around from game to game, I guess I could keep it within each individual visual novel. So I'll go ahead and start with the game that a lot of people are probably going to be clicking on this video for and want to hear my thoughts on, being Tsukihime Remake. I have not read the original Tsukihime. I've watched Fate Stay Night and then read Saber Route. I still need to read. That's why you don't see Rin or Sakura on here. I haven't read it yet. I'll get around to it eventually. I was very excited getting into Tsukihime Remake, and I think for the first few hours I was quite excited. And then there is something that comes up in Common Route that is going to be a spoiler. So I'll go ahead and give you guys a couple seconds to pause the video and maybe skip ahead if you don't want to hear me say something that is pretty like important to the plot and pushes the narrative forward that happens during Common Route, that, I don't know, kind of goes against, like, it brings about my reasoning for maybe my thoughts on both routes and how that event is used and discussed within both of the routes. So I'll give you guys a second if you do want to skip past the little bit of spoilers I'm about to say right now. 3, 2, 1. Is that Shiki kills Arcuid. So the plot of Tsukihime Remake is that the protagonist I believe was in an accident and then ends up having this condition where their eyesight is messed up and they can now see the lines, or I guess like the grooves within each and every single object in the world, that if you were to cut along one of those lines, it will break and destroy completely the object in question, whether that be a living object or not. And then they end up getting glasses that allow them to live a normal life. The scene in question in Common Route is where he first encounters Arcuid here and is overcome with this like sense of lust, but also just uncontrollable, like maybe not rage, but just like a desire to kill someone for no reason whatsoever. So he follows Arcuid all the way back to her apartment, rings the doorbell. When she opens the door, he slides in, slices her up into however many pieces it is, and then, just kills her and then walks away. And then that kickstarts the actual story of Tsukihime Remake, where you're just within a setting of like vampires and fights and whatnot. And what happens is Arcuid because she is a vampire, she's a rather powerful vampire, comes back to life, and then she ropes the main character into her own little games and has it to where you're going to be her bodyguard and you're going to help her fight. And so on Arkwood Route, when I was reading it, I actually felt like it was very similar to Saber Route in a way, which, I mean, no duh, it's written by the same person, but like the mannerisms and like the way the character is portrayed is very similar. But at the same time, I did like Arkwood a lot more than I did with Saber. I feel like while there is plenty of fight scenes, there is a noticeable amount of like downtime when it comes to Arkwood Route, to where it feels like by the end of the route you are more like connected to her as a character than Saber. One thing I will say is that I also play FGO, and for somebody that had not read the original Tsukihime, it's a little bit of like of a unanswered questions kind of deal, because Tsukihime Remake is not a complete game. It is just 2 routes out of like however many routes the original had. And coming from FGO, Arkwood is a unit that came out in that game, and her final ascension has her within this like blue dress that apparently people were like pretty excited to see implemented. And when I was going into Tsukihime Remake, was expecting some sort of like narrative or like plot point that would further explain the importance of her in the dress, and it's something that kind of only comes up 2 times for only a couple minutes per scene within the route. So I kind of was left with Arkwood Route at the ending feeling like it is maybe incomplete in some ways. That could just be me as an outsider not having played the original, but it did feel like it was pretty well rounded off towards the end. I've heard that they added in some additional scenes that came from like the manga of Tsukihime or something that was implemented into the route to further cap it off and make it feel, you know, pretty well rounded by the end. I want to say Arkwood Route is pretty solid. I think it has like the best fight scenes in any visual novel that I've read as well. So I can say, I want to put it maybe somewhere, put it like under Sumika and Maya, I want to say, for the time being. And then also, yeah, so last video was 2.5 hours. I was kind of breezing through it. I think because I have less routes, I'm probably going to talk about the routes in particular a little bit more. Maybe not all of these, but, you know, Tsukihime Remake, I'm sure people want to hear my genuine thoughts on everything. So let's get into Seal Route, which is where we split. Protagonist has killed Arkwood, and he's overcome with grief. He's like, oh no, I'm gonna go to jail, my life is over. And then he's considering offing himself in the middle of like this park late at night while it's raining, and then all of a sudden Seal pops up with an umbrella, stretches out her hand, and accepts him for who he is. And from there, we still kind of get roped along with Arkwood, but it is this sort of like jumping back and forth of like, okay, do we like Arkwood? Do we like Seal? Do we like Arkwood? Do we like Seal? And then we go with Seal, but then Seal does the same back and forth where she is with the protagonist and then, oh no, I'm gonna do this, and then jumps back and forth multiple times throughout the route. And then also, this is where I kind of don't like that event that happens in Common Route, because Seal Route like tries to explain the reasoning behind it, but it doesn't match up timeline wise. And then also it just feels very disingenuous for the protagonist character, because how I had kind of gone into detail about it in my review was that it's the visual novel that has where like the choices don't matter, right? So what happens is in Common Route, Shiki, the protagonist, goes off just on a whim. No like planning, just I want to kill Arkwood because that's just what I'm feeling in the moment. Does it, washes his hands of it, and yes, he's struck with grief throughout the entirety of Seal Route over doing that. But then at the same time, it is kind of like a weird narrative where the writers, or writer, if Nasu was the only person that actually wrote Seal Route, has it to where he gives you choices that are on Seal Route where you're allowed to do more like negative things to people, or like, you know, get in fights too. It's not even just coming down to killing other characters. There's somewhere it's just like, okay, if you're gonna participate in a fight, and throughout the entirety of Seal Route, you are like just a pacifist that just sits on the sidelines and watches Seal do all the fighting. And it feels very just odd, because if at any point you do one of the decisions that is like quote unquote bad, you're punished for it, you get a bad ending, and then you gotta go back and redo all your choices again in order to get to the ending. And then even so, like I said, on Seal Route, there is still a required bad ending that you have to watch, even though it shows both dialogue options. You have to watch the bad ending, go back, and then redo it again. It just feels very just bad, because it made me really dislike the protagonist to be like a hypocrite, right? That he can go kill somebody, and then after that, now it's like, okay, well, now it's like holier than thou. Oh, you know, no, don't go fighting with people. It's bad to hurt people. So, you know, I'm gonna be a pacifist starting now. And I don't know, I really wanted to like Seal. Maybe just because she has blue hair, but I don't know. I will not be pulling for her in FGO, I don't think, when she finally comes around to Global. What do I want to do? Like, it wasn't like egregiously bad. Obviously, it's Tsukihime remake. The quality of the visual novel is still really solid, but at the same time, it still is like, I don't know, man. It still feels kind of jank. I'm gonna go ahead and I'll put it, you know, for now, I almost want to say I'll put it like down here, maybe. What game next do I want to talk about? I guess we could do Lamine. Sorry for those of you that only read translated visual novels. I have a lot of non-translated VNs this time around. So let's go ahead and we'll do Lamine, which I guess we can maybe try and like split them up here real quick. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but that way I can kind of grab them all around the same time frame as one another. So that's 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I guess we can go ahead and do Nanami Route first, which is the main girl of the game. In my review, I kind of did spoil a little bit of it, but so Nanami Route is, Common Route is quite brief, and then what happens is that I would say this is probably the best childhood friend route that I have read out of every visual novel. It feels very like close, like in the relationship wise, because I'm gonna talk about it when I do the next iteration of like the visual novel title or game release tier list. But when I was reading Sakura no Uta, I dropped the game. I literally booted up Lamine like immediately afterward. And what was weird is that the route that I was on in Sakura no Uta probably was like, 15-20 hours deep, felt next to no connection with the character, and then within like probably 30 to 40 minutes you already feel very much like tight bond between the player character and Nanami, and then you get to see how that grows very quickly after Common Route is done, after your first like maybe 2 hours of playing the game, where you have a time skip and now you are just like pretty much boyfriend girlfriend, but not officially. Nanami Route deals with a different girl by the name of Sakura that you meet in Common Route, and how she has kind of developed a crush on the player character when they were young, and she confesses because she's about to move away from the town. And so what happens is that since the main character and Nanami aren't dating, Nanami, along with a couple of other friends within the group, say, you know what, yeah, go ahead and like, what's it called? Humor Sakura, and maybe like hang out with her for the next couple of days because she's gonna be moving away. So that way she doesn't have any sort of like regrets. So you go on a like school field trip, you kind of, interact with Sakura in some ways, but at the same time, you don't get close. You make it very like clear that you don't think of Sakura in a romantic sense. But when, like Sakura accepts that, and then when she leaves, then the relationship between the player character and Nanami starts to grow, and it is very much within the scope of, like I had mentioned in my review, where Sakura kind of leaves behind a message of, like, you know, the whole reason why she confesses to the player character is because she wants to enjoy life in the moment, because at any moment things can change and you might not have the exact same things that you had previously. So that becomes a recurring theme towards the latter end of Nanami's route, and it feels pretty impactful. So I want to say Nanami route, I was gonna say I should not be doing very rapid movements because I could do something very quickly with all these routes all together. Nanami route, I almost want to say is like probably high up there. I want to say I could probably put it like right here. And then next up we can do, I think it's Suzuka. If I have any of the names wrong, I'm not going to worry about it too much this time, because if all goes well, editing wise, there should be something on the side of the screen that's telling you the name of each character and the route and like what game it's from. So this is the sister to the player character, and in this route, so each and every single one of the 4 routes in Lamine has a like dedicated physical object that correlates and like progresses the story. So on Nanami's route, it's like a hair clip. In Suzuka's route, it is a telescope. So in common route, she gets a telescope from their father, and they go out to look at the stars. But what had happened is previously she likes to stargaze, and she invites the player character, her brother, to go stargaze before they get the telescope, and the player character enjoys the time that they spend together. And then upon getting the telescope, Suzuka starts to not have a need to like invite her brother as much. So then the player character goes ahead and he ends up accidentally breaking the telescope on one of the days where they actually are stargazing. He feels really bad about it. But then when they go for repairs, the dad takes it over to a repair shop. He starts to get the idea of like, oh, you know what? Maybe it would be better if the telescope stayed broken. So then he goes ahead to the garage where they're keeping the telescope and takes away one of like the screws in order to make it to where they're not going to be able to fully repair it. And then it leads to like he gets reprimanded in a way, I think. But then what happens is that we have the time skip at the end of common route forward to the actual character route, and there you can tell that the distance between both player character and Suzuka is very vast now, to where the typical like Oni-chan like pretty close relationship, and now it's very awkward the way that they talk to one another, and they feel very distant. And the whole point of that route is kind of closing that gap, and then also being able to finally like say after all these years what had happened previously during common route, and being able to like hopefully have them accept you as like, okay, well, I'm sorry for doing this. So I think this route in particular, I liked it quite a lot as well. I want to say we could probably put it like, I think maybe right around here for now. Then next up we can do Hikari, which is a cousin route, and her object is that on common route every year she comes to visit the town of Lamine during the summer, and during the summer on common route they go out to find these like oysters that have pearls within them in the ocean, because she for whatever reason wants to collect pearls. And what happens is that they go to this certain beach and they find a whole bunch of like clams or oysters that have pearls within them. They grab it, and then like the very next day, I want to say it's like the dad finds out and tells them like, you weren't supposed to do that. There was signs that was blocking off that beach because it's supposed to be where it is like a protected beach that they don't want people to mess up. So he says, no, you should put the pearls back. So then they go to the beach, and Hikari is kind of like a little bit sad because of the fact that they really wanted the pearls, but they begrudgingly toss the pearls back into the ocean. at the beach that they went to. And then when we go into the actual character route for her, it is a tsundere route, but then also it does kind of follow along the trend of common route, to where since she leaves, because she only comes during a certain amount of time every year during summer, what happens is that when it's like, since she knows she's going to be leaving at the end of summer this year for her route, she decides that she wants to go back and try to find pearls yet again. And what happens is that they end up like braving the elements when it comes to like storms that kind of come up, or like the tide and like the currents of the ocean. And it is in just a way of trying to like relive her childhood and find and do something that she never quite really got to do when she was younger. I don't know. I think Hikari route is a pretty solid route for what it is. Like I said, it is a pretty solid like tsundere route. I want to say I could probably put it like, maybe I could put it like here. And then lastly, we have Tai Senpai. She is like the older girl, and for her route, it is a little harder to get onto it because she doesn't really have a like common route extension. You bump into her once or twice during common route when you're younger, but there isn't really any sort of like growth that happens. So when you get into the time skip, you're still technically in common route after said time skip. And what happens is that there is the school field trip that is important on Nanami's route, and they end up needing a student from the class to like volunteer to be on the student council in order to try and plan out the field trip. So you get nominated begrudgingly, and when you're in the student council, everyone else there is like half listening, doesn't really want to be there, and Tai Senpai is at the head of it. She is leading the like this actual field trip, but on top of that, she also goes around and does a lot of like volunteer services, and a lot of the time she does all of that by herself. So over time, in your time at the student council and talking to Tai Senpai, you grow fond of her, and you start to kind of get a little irritated at the fact that she does so much for other people, but no one ever helps her out. So you end up doing that, and what happens on her route is she kind of has a realization, and the player character kind of forces that on her. I would say there's not many visual novels that I read to where the like H scenes are pretty important or relevant to the plot, and I think Tai Senpai is one of the routes where the H scenes do affect how heavily the like theming or like what you're supposed to take away from the route is affected by the H scenes. So Tai Senpai, and also the player character tells Tai that, you know, once they've like started being in a relationship, that he wants her to become like, I guess, a grown-up. He wants her to stop doing so much for others and at some point finally start to take care of herself. And tells her, you know, I want you to be able to be happy doing something for yourself, and I want you to like know what you want to do in life once we graduate from high school, so that way we can both be together and we can live happily without needing any sort of like restrictions or something along those lines. But I think Tai Senpai, for the route for her, ends up feeling pretty impactful because at the very tail end of it, there is an H scene followed by another scene that happens afterward that feels very like, very much kind of like, what would be the word? It's like somber or like kind of saddening in a way, but at the same time makes sense for all the build-up that led to that point. I think Tai Senpai route, I want to say, is probably maybe somewhere around, we could probably put her actually towards the end or the top of B tier for right now. So that would be all of Lamine's routes done, and I guess we could then next go You know what? Let's do Infinite Stratos next, because I doubt you guys want to hear 7 routes of a non-translated game followed by another 7 routes from a non-translated game. So let's go ahead and let me grab all of the Infinite Stratos Ignition Hearts characters all together, and we can talk about each and every single one of them back to back to back to back. Did I grab all of them? I do believe I did. So I guess we can start with, so I'm not going to rank common routes, but I'll go ahead and say that Infinite Stratos Ignition Hearts common route is quite impactful, and it does lead into the actual plot of each and every single dedicated route, to where what happens is that there is a like school fair or like festival, I guess, where all the clubs are doing something, and all the classes are doing some sort of like, event for the festival. And so the class is going to be doing like a cafe, and then what happens is that student council president Tatsunashi tells a player character for her sister who doesn't want to partake in the festival, can you please try and convince her to like interact with other students, because I'm worried about her. So you go ahead, on the day of the festival, she is plugging away. She's working on ISs, which are these like mechs. So it's a very like, high technology game. But she's working on her own mech, which in like this, what's it called? Like warehouse or whatever in the school. And what happens is, as you're like, okay, no, I'll help you out, and so that way we can try and work on it, and then you gotta promise me that you'll come and enjoy the festival. There is like a bomb within that like room, or like the warehouse or whatever you want to call it, and you call up people to have them help like disengage it, but there's not enough time, so you end up having to like cut the wires to the bomb to try and like disarm it. And what happens is that even after successfully trying to disarm it, there was like a backup thing that happens to where the bomb goes off. You protect Kanzashi, which is the younger sister, and then you are left with memory loss or amnesia, to where you don't really remember a whole lot of things apart from like your identity, and you're still not sure like what you're doing at the school, what your role is, how you're able to like pilot a mech, etc., etc. And from there, all the routes are built around the fact of how each girl is kind of trying to help the player character to regain their memory. So I think first route that I played was Laura route, and it feels the closest to, I guess, like the canon route, because it feels like it's closest in line to the actual anime, where they continue, and what happens is that they decide towards the start of each of the dedicated character routes that they are going to redo the festival this time, but this time they've upped their security, so that way there shouldn't be any sort of like potential bomb threats. And Laura decides that, we should probably just stick with the maid cafe, and then from there her whole route feels like relatively wholesome. For those of you that have watched Infinite Stratos, you would know that it is like a very just over the top harem anime where everyone is thirsting over the player character because he's the only guy in an all-female school. Laura's route actually feels like it is more genuine like emotions and like affection for the character. So she ends up becoming like the lead for the class in order to prepare for the event of the maid cafe. And she's comes from like a military background, so she's very strict and very like dedicated to a certain like regiment of what she has. Is she has all the classmates wake up in the early hours of the morning before school even starts, and they all like train and like learn like routines of what they should do for when it comes to the student festival. And over time, a lot of the students start to like dislike her and say, oh, she's pushing us too hard, yada yada. And it's this like sort of back and forth between the player character and Laura of like, okay, well, I still believe in you. I know that what you're doing is the right thing to do, and that you shouldn't let other people kind of like push you in a direction that's like not true to yourself and whatever. I appreciate what you're doing. And then what happens is that like towards the end of the route, Laura starts to kind of break down and question herself because of all of the effort she's put in, but the fact that the player character still hasn't recovered from their amnesia and being able to kind of like accept that. I think Laura's route is pretty solid. I want to say it was probably my second favorite out of all the Infinite Stratos routes, so I don't know exactly where, for like how high up I would want to put it. Let's go ahead. We could probably put it like maybe like somewhere around there for now. Next up, we can do, I guess I could say, Tatanashi, which is head of the student council, or she's student council president. She's the briefest of the routes. I think like most of the character routes probably range around like the average of like 6 or 7 hours. I want to say hers felt like it was probably like 3 or 4 and felt the least impactful because what happens is the player character ends up just helping her with her tasks in the student council. So you get to see just her day-to-day life of how many things she has to do, and they do that over the course of like anywhere ranging from like 4 days to a week, and not much actually happens on each dedicated day. The one saving grace I will say about her route is quite fun, because on the day of like the festival, what happens is that similar to the anime, there is like they decide to do a play, and the play is like Cinderella, but what happens is that every single girl in the school wants to be Cinderella because the player character is the prince, and it's set to where all of the girls are trying to like chase down the player character and steal the crown off of his head, because whoever gets the crown is going to have like the player character to themselves for one day at any point. So they get to have a date with the character. Whoever wins that like competition gets to have a date with the player character, and it's a pretty like fun kind of like instance of how they do it. I do wish that they had multiple like kind of choices for any of the characters outside of Tatanashi, who shows up towards the tail end of that scene in particular. But it's pretty like fun little like set of sequences where you get to bump into multiple characters throughout the story and try and like what would be the word, like circumvent or like dodge them or like outwit them, so that way you can continue on without losing the crown. I don't know, it's a pretty fun little sequence, but the route in general is not too great. I want to say we could probably put it like pretty low on the spectrum. We could probably put it like there, I want to say. And then we can go ahead and do her sister, which is all about after the events of Common Route. She feels very like the player character losing his memory is her fault, but over time, I don't know, it's a pretty fun route. I got a lot of similar vibes in this route to, I think her name's May from Canon, or Mai from Canon, in that it is like a triple kind of like group of friends route, where you have the player character, you have Kanzashi, and then you have another girl from the class, and every day they meet up in that like warehouse, or I guess it's probably a hangar, right? It's a hangar within the school where they have all the mechs, and every day after school they meet up and they work on Kanzashi's mech in order to try and get it finished in time for the next festival. And then I don't know, it's like a pretty sweet route. Is it anything that is like impactful though? I wouldn't say so. I want to say we could probably put it kind of like on the lower spectrum, maybe around like probably put it like there, I want to say. Next up, I'll go ahead and I'll say Cecilia route, which is built around the fact that I think before the events in Common Route where things start to pick up, player character tells Cecilia that she needs to be kind of like true to herself, and that she shouldn't try to copy what other people do. She should do things that only she can do. So then after the player character comes down with amnesia, what happens is that everyone's trying to come up with ideas to like kickstart his memory and get it to where he is back to normal. And the player character's older sister, who also happens to be one of the teachers at the school, kind of like throws out an idea of, they have read something about people with amnesia, if you hit them with something that is like so jarringly different from what they experienced in their normal life, that they would, like, the cognitive or whatever, like, dissonance between those two different types of lifestyles will click within your brain, and then you'll like snap back to how you were originally. And so Cecilia comes up with the idea of wanting to like pretend that she's engaged to the player character, so that way I don't know. And what happens is that the whole route feels relatively solid until, I would say, towards like the latter portion. What happens is she goes to the older sister and convinces her, I want to do this for the player character, kind of like gaslights her in a way, but is like, you know, like, how could you be so cold? Don't you want your brother to kind of go back to normal? And you can tell that with the sister, she's very like hardened, but at the same time she has to kind of keep her feelings bottled up because she's trying to like maintain a certain image. But she ends up going and giving Cecilia the go ahead to pretend to be the player character's like housewife, or, you know, like his fiance. And so we have a certain like set of events that go where she like wakes the player character up every morning. They're, you know, glued to each other whenever they're outside of class, and they convince all the other students in the school to go ahead with this plan, and they all are in on it, and they all pretend that Cecilia is the fiance to the player character. But at one point things go a little too far, and then now all the other students turn their back on Cecilia. They tell the player character what actually happened, and then they now have like this massive tournament where everyone's competing to be like the next person in line to try and like help the player character to regain his memory, but at the same time, you know, be kind of like in a relationship with him. So I don't know, Cecilia route is decent, but at the same time it does kind of flip to where, I don't know, I feel like towards the latter end kind of is a little bit like not what I would have hoped for. I want to say we could probably put it like still somewhere around like there, and then we could talk about Hoki, which is like the main girl, and then her route is based around the fact that they are going to be doing the play, where it's like Cinderella, but in this instance there is only one Cinderella, which ends up they like draw straws or whatever, or like paper slips out of a hat. Hoki ends up winning, and then whenever they try to rehearse their lines for Cinderella, Hoki gets like really, embarrassed. She can't really like say her lines properly, and it has this like very sense of like rivalry but camaraderie, where what I forgot to mention is on all the Infinite Stratos routes, you don't play as the main character anymore. You switch to the point of view of the girl throughout almost the entirety of every single route. So the whole route you're playing in the point of view of Hoki, and you get to see like how the other girls kind of come at her because they're all jealous of the fact that she won the position of being Cinderella. But at the same time, like Cecilia in particular ends up kind of becoming like closer when it comes to like best friends kind of deal, because Cecilia pushes Hoki to like be better and say, you know what, like I can steal this position from you at any moment, so I need you to do better. But at the same time, you know, it's like kind of like pushing people, and then like as things happen throughout the route, all of the girls kind of get together and they give Hoki their like, you know, saying, I have confidence in you that you are going to be able to bring back the player character's memory. So you just need to keep doing what you're doing and like being able to like, I don't know. I think Hoki's route is quite solid. It's a little bit longer than I think all the other girls' routes because of the fact that she is like the main girl, but it's not too long of a difference. So it's not going to feel like if you read any of the other IS routes, it's going to be, or this is like the only route, right? So I want to say Hoki route is quite solid, all things considered. I can maybe put it like under there. Got 2 more for Infinite Stratos, which I think I'll do this right now, which is Charlotte route. I know she's like the most popular girl when it comes to Infinite Stratos because she's like the most normal. And I read her route last, hoping that it was going to be really good. And unfortunately, I think her route is just like a mix match of both Cecilia and Hoki's routes, because it kind of tries to use the different plot points for both of them, where Charlotte tries to be like, you know, the fiance to the player character, and then also the kind of deal of like, okay, well, she's going to be Cinderella as well. So it feels weird because her route doesn't feel unique, right? And considering she's like one of the main 5 girls from Infinite Stratos for like the original cast, it just feels weird that like the most popular girl got like the leftovers when it comes to a route. I don't know. It's still like all right, but I will say it was a bit of a letdown. I'm not gonna lie. All things considered, though, I would say I'd probably put it like right there. And then we got Rin, which I think is the least popular girl out of Infinite Stratos, and I think this is like one of the most like unique, or like I really enjoyed this route quite a bit. And I think when I was talking in my review of the game, a lot of it was kind of like based around the fact of how much this one route kind of overall impressed me. So her thing is that it kind of deals with the same level of like rivalry that you see in Hoki's route, but at the same time it's like a tsundere thing. She's not particularly going to be in the play. What it is that they're going to be hosting the cafe again, but what they're doing is they are having like a competition for what dishes that they're going to serve during the festival. And Hoki is like the food girl. She knows how to cook, but she's not too like confident in her abilities after seeing the player character come down with amnesia. And she is like, both her and Hoki are childhood friends to the player character, but Hoki is like second fiddle to, but Rin is like second fiddle to Hoki, to where Hoki was like the original childhood friend and Rin was the second childhood friend, and she's not too confident in like the fact that the player character doesn't really remember their relationship anymore. And what happens throughout her route is that she gets pushed on by Hoki to like be more proactive, and then also to be more confident in herself. And it's like a route revolving around, I guess, like using food, you know, like to a man's stomach, where, you know, trying to like gain and have the player character remember things by having him taste the foods that she used to cook for him. And I don't know, it's pretty nice. There's like a whole sequence which is like far longer than any of the other sequences for any of the other IS character routes, to where on one of the days on all the routes you like leave the campus of the school and you go off to do something else instead. So Rin's iteration of that is that they go to the player character's house to go clean up, because the older sister for the player character says, you know what would be a good idea is if you go to our house and you like do a bunch of cleaning, because it'll help you to kind of like remember like the layout of the place that you grew up in. And then so the player character invites Rin to come with him, and they spend like that whole day like having a heart-to-heart talking to each other while they're cleaning the house. And I don't know, I just really liked Rin route. I think it did surprise me, considering that when I was starting Infinite Stratos Ignition Hearts, I thought it was going to be just like standard, you know, quote-unquote console the end, where it's going to be a pretty brief like 20-hour game that's going to have maybe just like a little bit of snippets of like scenes with the various girls. And I was impressed with not only how Infinite Stratos uses like the different like point of view perspective, or like the different point of view thing to kind of like elevate the routes, but that Rin route in particular felt a little bit more like intimate than what you'd probably expect. So I want to say I could probably put that like maybe like right there. Actually, it's not like emotional, but it's pretty enjoyable route. And now that we're done with that, I guess we can go ahead and get into the Cafe Stella routes. I can split it up with a translate at the end. So let's go ahead and I will sort those so we can put all 5 of those back to back to back so that way I can grab them much more easier. What's weird is I finished Cafe Stella literally like less than a week ago, and I might have already forgot the character names, but that's when editing me will hopefully come in and let you guys know. So I guess we could start with this. So Cafe Stella, the whole like gimmick, because Ubisoft games all kind of do have a gimmick, is that player character in common route dies, he gets ran over by a car, and he's brought back to life, but because he like rewound time, because his soul was strong enough, he didn't want to like let go of his life yet, because he had some sort of like lasting regret, and that is centered around these like butterflies that act as like a soul thing. It's not particularly fleshed out, I'm not gonna lie, because it's a Ubisoft game, which is kind of sad to say. When I was playing this, I was like, oh man, it'd be so cool if Natsuzora Kanata got like a remaster where it's just updated graphics but they kept the story. But yeah, it's typical Ubisoft, so it's just like that's why I say it's a gimmick. They're trying to rebuild this like cafe because of things. Certain characters have certain motivations for why they want the cafe to succeed, and throughout Common Route, they very easily make the cafe like a booming place for people to come eat and drink. There's no pushback whatsoever, and it just kind of happens. But for as bad as Common Route is, I think it's also very cringe, I'm not gonna lie. When you get into the character routes, I found myself really enjoying the character routes. It took a little while because, you know, from the game that we're going to talk about next, I went from this one into Cafe Stella, and the whiplash between the two different kinds of tones or, you know, feelings of the two VNs was kind of weird at first, but eventually I got settled back into that like very like chill, turn your brain off and enjoy slice of life rom-com. So I enjoyed Cafe Stella, but as far as like all the routes, they are mostly romantic, and not too heavily drawn, bar for maybe like one. So we can bang this one out real quick, which is like the little like spin-off, because usually a lot of the Ubisoft titles, they have 4 heroines and then they'll have like 1 or 2 side routes for lesser like sub-heroines that, in order to not be like, okay, well, we forgot about this girl, they instead give that girl route, but it's only like maybe like 2 hours long at most. Her route is revolving around, she used to work at a different cafe, got fired, and then during Common Route you convince her to work for your cafe instead, and the whole point of her route is centered around the fact that there's going to be this like Valentine's Day cook-off where they're all going to be baking cakes, and they're all going to be graded by the various judges, and one of the judges just so happened to be her previous employer, and her having to kind of like come up with something that's going to wow everyone and show that she's grown as a person, grown as a cook in her profession. Isn't particularly great, not really. It's kind of alright. I would say probably it's going to be pretty low on the spectrum, I'm not gonna lie, just because of how short it is. So we could probably lock it in right like around there. Next up, I will say, is this girl, which I don't remember her name, so hopefully the editing wise will save me. She is one of the most popular characters. I have seen a decent amount of like fan art of her on Twitter. She is sort of like the cool girl, where she has this very like standoffish, like I don't know what the word would be, where she's not too close to any one person. She, you know, has her distance, and I think that's the whole point of why people like her, is that when you get onto her route, you start to like bridge that gap and close the distance and start to get to understand her a bit more like personally. Her route is centered around the fact that the reason why she wanted to have the cafe built and is like centered around the fact that when she was younger, her parents used to run a cafe, and for whatever reason they needed to close down the cafe, and they were never able to like live out their like dream. So this girl from Cafe Stella, as a kid, has the dream of opening up her own cafe because she wants to kind of like continue on with her parents' legacy and, you know, be able to enjoy and have fun with living up to the dream of running a successful cafe that her parents was never able to do. It kind of has a little bit of like not wanting to show emotion and being like where she's not committed to a relationship until you're able to kind of like get in and convince her that she should still be willing to have a relationship. I don't know. Where would I put this? I want to say still probably gonna be somewhere in like the C tier at most, because it's not too crazy good. I want to say what's weird is it's like a lot of the Ubisoft characters look very similar too. In a way, I want to say it's probably, maybe put it like there, I want to say. And then we can move on to this girl. I think her name is Nozomi, and this is not a waifu tier list, but I will say this is a pretty like S tier waifu. So it's like a childhood friend route. I like it because it's like, I don't know. I think the heroine in this route really does sell the route for me personally, because I kind of like that little bit of like almost like long-term relationship. It's kind of funny where you have like the various moments of her kind of like being overly emotional and like fake crying over like the dumbest of things, because like she wants you to understand as the player character that, you know, you should only have eyes for her, and anytime that you're talking to a girl or whatever, I don't know. Her route is based around the fact that there's like a red, so most of the butterflies in Cafe Stella are blue, and like I said, they all encapsulate some sort of like soul or essence. Her route is like a red butterfly that's at the shrine that she lives at, and this butterfly is like this soul from 3,000 years ago that has lingered, and every single year they bring about some sort of like disaster or whatever, but it gets satiated whenever there is like the New Year's festival that happens at the start of the year, and they go into hibernation. What happens is that they have to like, they find out the existence of the butterfly, and then they try to like resolve it. What happens is that they don't fully resolve the issue, so then they end up coming up with the idea of trying to like put the soul to rest and trying to do some like detective work to figure out what is happening and what they can do to like put the problem to rest for good. Kind of like, I don't know, feels a little weird because when you get towards the end of it, almost feels like they make the like relationship between Nozomi and the like the soul within the butterfly is like a little too close for how little they actually know each other. They try and play it up a little bit too much, but like I said, it's a pretty solid waifu route if you just are looking for a rom-com, which is probably what you're doing if you're reading a Ubisoft title. I want to say I could probably put this like, I had a lot of fun reading it actually. We can put it like right up here, I want to say. And then I think this is May from Cafe Stella, and her whole thing is that she's like the younger Kohai or whatever, and she has this like where the player character is able to see the butterflies because he has this like deep attachment to, well, the fact that he died, right? And that he was able to go back in time. He can see the butterflies. May naturally can see the butterflies through her left eye, but she can't see them as butterflies. She sees them as like these little orbs, and then from staring at a butterfly or orb, she's able to like consume it, and it goes into her eye, so it disappears. And her route is centered around the fact that when she was younger, she was in the swimming club, and her best friend used to be like very depressed, and May would try to like work her magic and make the butterflies disappear. No matter how many times she did that for her friend would still always end up becoming depressed. So we kind of like, her route is centered around the fact of being afraid of like helping others and not being sure of like whether the stuff that they're doing in life is like the right thing to do, and kind of like coming to terms with the fact of that you can't help everyone, but at the same time, like, you just need to stick to your decisions and be able to consider that, you know, what you think is the best thing to do was probably the best thing to do, or something along those lines. Main route is relatively solid. Romance wise, it's pretty nice. If I had to say where I'd particularly place it, we could probably put it like right here, towards the latter end of B tier. And then we will go ahead and do Kana route, which is the main girl of Cafe Stella, and is like the smug white hair girl, stereotypical white hair girl that every other Ubisoft title has, apart from Riddle Joker. So Kana is the like witch. So she goes around and she is the one that like gathers up the butterflies and sends them off into the afterlife, so that way they can then be reincarnated and come back as, you know, a human being in their following life. Kana route is a route that's centered around one, I guess, is being able to, in a similar vein to the black hair girl from Cafe Stella, being able to accept the fact that, you know, it's okay to show their like true feelings and accept the fact that they want to be in a relationship with the player character. But then at the same time also is this like ticking time bomb of a route where Kana is going to disappear at some point, and she doesn't want to be in a relationship because she feels like she's going to be leaving the player character behind by himself, and she doesn't really want to do that. And kind of is like a more emotionally driven route. What Ubisoft kind of does every now and again, of like testing their mettle and showing that they can still write something that is more like emotionally driven, despite the fact that they're known for rom-com. Kana route is relatively solid. I want to say it's not something like new or unique, so in that way it is maybe like a little lessened, as far as like if you were somebody just getting individual novels, I could feel like if you read Kana route, it's going to have more impact than after you've read a solid amount of visual novels, or like a solid chunk. That said, I think Kana route is quite fun. It's still a nice romance route. Does some of the romance get a little bit overbearing at times? Not gonna lie, kind of does, but in that way though, or fashion, I think it's still reasonably solid. I want to say we could probably put it like, could say we'll do some revisions towards the end of it. We'll put her there for now. And lastly, let's get into the big game, Clear. So I got into Clear and I was not really sure that it was going to be a Nakage. I've noticed, if you've noticed, you know, between Lamine, Natsuzora Kanata, and now Clear, I really have a thing for reading visual novels that are like set on an island during the summer. That's my like thing of really enjoying BNs. I'm like, oh, it's an island game. Time to read it. So Clear is a Nakage, and if you're not familiar with that term, that means cry game. So similar in scope to things such as Clannad, Little Busters, Canon, etc., etc. And when it comes to Clear, common route is centered around the fact of us learning that the player character is a vampire, quote unquote. And what that means is that he does not feel emotions. He feels very like hollow on the inside and is not able to fully express himself. And throughout the various routes in Clear, we get to have it to where we're trying to work on that as the player character and be able to overcome that and be able to express their feelings. But at the same time, each and every single heroine in Clear also struggles with some sort of like trauma themselves, and we get to overcome that as well on any dedicated route. So we can start probably with Nonoka-chan, or Nonoka, or Nono-chan, which was the first route that I read. And I actually think it's, well, first off, I want to say, if you are going to read Clear, any other visual novel that I played has it to where my first playthrough, I'll play it completely blind and see which route I end up on. Clear is the one visual novel where I think it is so easy to get a bad ending on your first playthrough, because you have to choose each and every single dialogue for the character that's route that you want to end up on. So like, I think I literally missed it by like one for like a couple different characters on my first playthrough. So I think Clear is a game where if you are going to read it, more so than any other visual novel, you kind of do need a walkthrough. But yeah, Nono-chan I think is a really good like bridge for the gap if you're somebody that's coming from Clannad to Clear, because Nonoka feels closer to that like key magic, where a lot of the other routes have some sort of like kind of like magic system in place. Nonoka has like the more like kind of surreal or like heavier tone of magic implementation than any other routes, I would feel. So I feel like it is the most similar to a standard key route in that way. Her route is centered around the fact that as of I think 2 years prior, she just like woke up on the island one day and she had amnesia, and so she has very little memory. She just knows her name. She kind of has some like vague memories of her father, and then what we reveal later on in her route is that she also has memories of herself committing suicide, and she doesn't know how she's alive and how she ended up on the island. So what happens is that the player character's grandfather takes Nono-chan into the household and has her work there as a maid while she's trying to get her life together and try and like resolve her amnesia and get her memory back. And Nono-chan across her route is kind of trying to like, what would be the word? Do some like detective work and try and figure out what was her life like in the past. Trying to decide, like what happened with her father, what happened to her herself, why does she have these memories of herself committing suicide. And then at the same time, there is this nice like blend of romance. I think there is one set of scenes that is actually quite enjoyable when they go to the like school field trip where they go to like a beach for like 3 days straight. Nonoka is a senior, so she is not part of the class that gets to go on this field trip. So they devise this plan of where Nonoka is gonna like take her money and she's gonna take like multiple taxis or like buses on the day that the player character is going on the field trip, and they're gonna meet up at like the spot for the hotel that the school is staying at, and Nonoka is gonna like be in secret for showing up at the field trip even though she's not supposed to be there, because they're dating and they don't want to be apart. And it's this kind of like sweet set of moments of like that whole time while they're waiting to like meet up again, they're constantly like texting one another and being like, just like, I don't know, it's a pretty like sweet kind of romance route. It also centers heavily around the fact of the club that Nonoka is in the school. Clear almost kind of feels like Katawa Shoujo in a way when it comes to the school setting. A lot like the school that they go to is purposely set to where they accept literally everyone. Like anyone that has some sort of like handicap or like trauma or whatever, they try to make things easier on them. So what it is like in multiple of the routes actually, so we could talk about another route, is that like if a student wants to make a club for the school and it's literally just them, they can go ahead and do that. It doesn't matter like how weird of an idea for a club it is, they'll go ahead and approve it. So Nonoka along with Haruno are in the picture book club, and they like to read picture books. So throughout Nonoka route, we have it to where the player character along with the other two girls are in the club together, and they decide that they're going to do, instead of reading picture books for once, they're going to actually make their own picture book. So throughout the entirety of Nonoka route, as we're trying to piece together the various memories from her amnesia, we're also getting into seeing a little bit of like a glimpse into Nonoka when she is making her picture book, and getting to the point of like the very tail end of the route when we get to see the completed work and read it in full, and kind of have that little layer of like, okay, retrospective and foreshadowing. Nonoka-chan, or Nono route, is quite enjoyable. So like I said, it's a pretty good route for if you are just getting into Clear and you are used to maybe some key routes instead. I almost want to say like every single Clear route is going to probably be an A tier. I'm not going to lie. Nonoka, I want to say, is probably like, maybe like here. Now let's go down and we can grab, I guess, the next girl that I did, which is Sayu. So Sayu route is based around, so she's like the energetic girl, I think it's the Genki girl, and she has this little like doll with her. So it's Sayu, and then her doll's name is Sayurine. When we first start the route, we're convinced that Sayu is like doing like some sort of ventriloquism, where she is like, you know, playing pretend and has her doll talking every time that they're like having conversations together. Sayu, every once in a while, is going around and she loses her doll, and we come to what happens is that these two thieves that like pull up in common route, we can talk about the like, because the thieves are a like recurring set of characters throughout multiple of the routes as well. But they come in and they steal Sayurine one day, and Sayu's really worried because, you know, that's her best friend. And we get to see Sayurine, or no, we get to see Sayu and how like close connection she has to a lot of people on the island, to where a lot of people on the island band together, and like every night they're going out around the island scoping around to try and find these two thieves, to like, you know, knock the sense out of them, bring them to justice, and also to get Sayu's doll back. And we eventually do that. So they get the doll back. The thieves are apprehended, and we kind of have these moments of like, okay, well, why did they steal the doll? And it's because the thieves, one of the thieves, realizes that the doll isn't like just a doll. It actually has like a heart of its own, and that the doll itself can talk. So the Sayurine talks to the player character and is kind of like, okay, well, what do you think of Sayu? Because what we learn is after a certain event in Sayu's route, everything kind of flips. Sayu is part of the like community service club or whatever, alongside Miki, who's another character we can talk about. So she helps people, and what happens is that after a certain event, a lot of the people on the island flip, and they no longer are like best buddies. They're like fake friends. They were with Sayu because, you know, they thought she was like popular, she's a cute girl, you know, she's very kind, but then something happens and now that friendship is over. They don't care. They want to be as far away from Sayu as possible. And that kind of like leading into how Sayurine asks about the player character is like, you know, are you willing to stick with Sayu throughout like hardships? And what happens is that Sayu's route is probably the least magical out of all the routes in Clear, and it is very heavily based within like bullying, I want to say, for both psychological and physical bullying. I feel like it hit me really hard, I'm not gonna lie. There was like one scene, if you read Clear, it's the beach CG. You know the one. She's like sitting on a towel on the beach. And that scene in particular, I think, does like a really good way of like really making both the reader match up with their emotions with the player character, and making you like really frustrated. So I remember, I think like the following day after I had finished her route, I was thinking back, and I'm like, oh man, like that route was like really good. Because like it really did a good job of conveying the level of like bullying and how heavily that affects somebody. And I do like Sayu route. I think it is, like I said, the least magic oriented of all the clear routes, and I also think it's probably like the most, I guess toned down would be the word, but it's like the most like relatable of any of the sort of like traumas within clear. And for that, I mean, I do like energetic girls as well, so as far as waifu, Sayu is pretty good. But like I said, I think all of the clear routes are probably going to be A tier. Sayu route, I liked it more, I'm not gonna lie. I want to say I could probably put it like, we're gonna move some things around, so we'll put Sayu right there. Next we'll go ahead and I guess we could do Miki. Miki is probably the most like dark out of all the routes in clear. So clear, I would say in the PC version, between Miki and then Natsuki, I would say neither one of them is like definitively the main girl. So I would say Miki, Natsuki are both main girls in clear, and then also this girl here from the PS2 version is also a main girl. So none of the like routes feel like they are dedicated more time to one girl rather than the other, because I would say there's arguably 3 quote-unquote main girls in clear. Miki's route is probably the darkest out of all the routes in clear. So like I said, her and Sayu are within the like, well, community service club. So they go around and they help people on the island, and then what happens is that after they finish helping them, they have a little stamp book, and they have the person that they helped stamp their little like notebook, so that way it shows like, oh, I did a good deed for the day. It's kind of like a childhood friend route because the player character and Miki are neighbors and they used to hang out together all the time. Player character leaves the island for 7 years and then comes back. Miki is the very first person to show up and say, hey, how are you doing? Hey, it's great to see you back. When you show up on the island, you come off, you take the bus, you get off the bus, and all of a sudden Miki's coming in with the tram and she's waving out the window. She is the very first person that wants to see you when you come back to the island. And her whole thing is based around the fact of Miki feels some sort of regret. She feels like she is the one responsible for making the player character leave the island all these years ago, and she wants to rekindle their old relationship. Throughout the course of the route, Miki kind of is able to piece together the fact that the player character can no longer feel any sort of emotion, and she kind of tries to put these kinds of like instances of trying to gauge how much the player character is able to feel any sort of emotion, and in turn feels more and more so responsible for what has happened. We have like a scene where she is asking about, like, she remembers vividly when they're kids that the player character's dog passes away and they bury the dog on the hill, which is like, the hill is a very important place within Clear. But she asked, like, okay, do you remember the day that your dog died? And player character like half doesn't even remember the name of the dog, let alone what they felt during that day. And what happens is we get to a part towards the very end of Miki's route where they're going shopping. They're in a relationship together, and Miki's already very like unsure of how like solid their relationship is. But they walk out of like one of the buildings in the shopping center, and they smell this like scent, and they look into the alleyway and they see a dead dog in the alleyway. And what happens is the player character goes to grab the dog, slings it over his shoulder, and then Miki's like has this scent of, or has this like moment of like, oh my god, he's actually like able to kind of like feel some sort of like emotion, because he's about to ask like, where can he take this dog to go bury it? And so like once like someone from one of the shops comes out, and then the player character is like, oh, where's the nearest landfill, because I need to throw out this trash. And then Miki like loses it. She I think she slaps the player character and then starts running off, because at that point she's like, oh my god, he's so far gone, he can't feel any sort of emotion, like whatever. And that leads into a whole host of like what I would say is probably, I'm not going to spoil, one of the most like emotional and also probably like one of the like the best sequences I've seen in a visual novel, that just like the fallout of what happens after that scene and how we kind of take everything together and piece it all back at the very end. Miki's route, I think, like I said, is quite dark. It follows around the fact that Miki, being like Miss Goody Two Shoes and being like someone that's perfect, like really good at like school, where they get like almost perfect grades, they go around, do community service, and you get to see other little like perspectives of people that are jealous of Miki, people that like want to bully her, people that are like want to like almost kill her, and there's like a whole host of various different emotions that happen across Miki's route that I think makes the route in general feel really, really good. So I would say this is probably an S tier route. Where exactly in the S tiers? I want to say might be like Undercoat to me. Next up is going to be, we could do a PS2 route, actually. We could do Hisame, which I think is probably, maybe, I don't know. I want to say this is either like a top of A tier or maybe an S tier as well. I really like Hisame route. Like, I really do. This is probably my favorite, so I don't think it is quite as like hard. It doesn't hit as well as Miki. I probably liked it the most. Where I'd put it, we could probably put it like, we could probably leave it like bottom of S tier, I want to say. So Hisame and Haruno they work at the shrine. So Hisame is actually like the shrine priest's daughter. Hisame is just a part, or Haruno is just like a part-timer, and every night they go out to go put these spirits to rest. So what it is that Hisame has like this sword, and they go out because the player character can see ghosts because he's a vampire. He gets roped in out of his own like want to. They don't force him to help them, but in Hisame route, the player character plus Hisame and Haruno go out every night to go hunt down ghosts and slay them, so that way they can go into the afterlife. And for Hisame route, one of these days, so like the start of the route is quite repetitive. It is like next to no like daytime scenes, so there's hardly any moments where you're like talking to Hisame at the school. It is just like you show up at the shrine every night, and then everyone gathers their things and they go out to go hunt some ghosts. One of the days you're walking through the forest, and then the player character trips over a rock, and then when they shine their light on the rock, it ends up being this like sort of seal. It's like this rock that has, you know, a whole bunch of different like things on it, to where it's like a spirit, an evil lingering spirit that was sealed away many years ago, and it is released. Hisame quickly puts a temporary seal over it and then says, okay, we have like a week before it's going to break. We're going to go ahead and I'm going to get my father to come out, and he's going to go ahead and seal it for good. So don't worry, you're good. But then the player character feels responsible. He's like, oh, I feel really bad for doing that. Immediately afterward, the two thieves from Common Route show up, and then one of them does the same thing that the player character does and trips over it and then breaks that temporary seal, and then so the evil spirit comes out. And a couple days go by, and then all of a sudden they notice, wait, there's like way more ghosts showing up than there was previously. And so there's like a couple of fight scenes where they're just slaying ghost after ghost after ghost, hordes of ghosts that are all coming at them. And they start realizing, okay, we can't do this every single night. So they start doing research, trying to figure out, what is the cause of this, and they eventually do find out. One of the nights they go out and they run into the big bad himself, the evil demon that was sealed away for her however many years. He's this giant suit of armor that has a spirit within it, and Hisame is ready to give her life away in order to protect the player character in Haruno, but player character kind of snaps her out of it, pulls her away, and they just start running off. They leave because they're not trying to die. And then, so they, after that sequence, Hisame kind of shows her weakness in that she feels like she's not good enough. There is some sort of deep kind of trauma that she has within. She doesn't feel like she is strong enough to do her job, and we have to kind of figure out what that is. But she's at a breaking point. She can no longer hold her sword that she uses to slay the ghosts. So from that point onward, we're no longer going out to slay ghosts. We are trying to build up Hisame and get it to where she starts feeling better about herself. Haruno tells the player character to start kind of hanging out with her more, and from there we get into the relationship side of things. Hisame, there's some pretty fun, stereotypical, tropiness of rom-com situations that happen on Hisame's route, but like I said in my review, it feels like it's pretty refreshing considering how so many other points in Clear are. I did enjoy how much the romance in Hisame kind of grows over time, and then when we get towards the end of the route and we start to finalize our sort of conflict with the demon and trying to get that resolved, things happen that end up being quite emotional, and I think by the end of it, I think it's a very solid route, and it's kind of a shame that it's stuck on PS2, right? But yeah, I would say it's probably at the bottom of S tier. Next we can talk about Haruno, the other side of the spirits, and what's it called? Going around and slaying spirits, sending the ghosts to the afterlife. Haruno's route is less about that because she's the part-timer, and more so kind of like I said with Nodoka route, where she's part of the picture book reading club. Her favorite story is Pinocchio, and she really wants the player character to read Pinocchio because she wants to see what the player character's thoughts on the story of Pinocchio is. And as we progress through the nights, and every once in a while when we do go out to send some ghosts to the afterlife, we kind of learn more. Hisame lets on that she knows something about Haruno that she doesn't want to tell you because she feels like Haruno herself should tell you instead. And as we learn, Haruno gets possessed by a ghost, and then we have to kind of use a charm to knock her out of it, so that way she's back to normal. Haruno route, I almost forgot to mention, is split into pretty two segments. We see this ghost girl who's running around, which is more materialized than the normal ghost that we see throughout Clear. And what we end up doing is we end up finding out that this girl was a girl that had passed away not too long ago, and her mother comes to the town one day because she hears these sort of rumors that there is a ghost girl running around. They get in contact with the mother and they find out her story, and the mother is a single mother that was trying to kind of figure out some things. She feels bad with the fact that her daughter passed away due to, in some part, her negligence, but not completely of her own negligence. But regardless of the fact that she feels bad, she wants to do everything for her daughter in order to make sure that her daughter passes on into the afterlife. So that's where the player character, Haruno, and Hisame come in and say, yes, we will help you send your daughter to the afterlife. And so the first half of Haruno's route is doing that and trying to we have a pretty heavy emphasis on that kind of key kind of style of really heavy emotions when it comes to family ties and stuff. But like I said, we find out that Haruno is very easily possessed by ghosts, so that is her secret. And we, upon discovering that secret, find out more and more things about Haruno and why exactly she works with Hisame when it comes to sending ghosts to the afterlife, but then also maybe there's a certain ghost in particular that Haruno doesn't want to send into the afterlife, and how that kind of affects the relationship between the player character and Haruno, and how that relationship can break. And I don't know, I think Haruno's route is really solid. I think Haruno's route, because so in each and every single clear route, you have both the moment of where the heroine kind of resolves their conflict and the moment where the player character resolves their conflict. And I do think that when it comes to in Haruno route, the moment when the player character resolves his inner conflict is probably the most memorable. I think the sequence, or like the area of where it happens, is literally like the most memorable. That being said, I do think Haruno route is probably like somewhere around like maybe here, I want to say. And we have two more routes. So we have Yuduru, which is a PS2 exclusive route. If it's any influence over whether you would want to read the PS2 version of Clear or not, she's voiced by the same voice actor as Rin from Fate. So yeah, if that has any influence over whether you'd want to enjoy her as like a waifu or like for a route that you want to read, there's that. Yuduru is, so what happens is on common route, one day the player character is walking on the beach. He sees her, she's staring up to the sun on the beach, or like staring at the ocean or something, and she's just like talking to herself, like talking about how she's gonna like one day, you know, yada yada yada. And he reaches out, oh hey, are you okay? And she turns around and she sees the player character. Moment of realization, and then she pulls out a gun. Like, you try to talk things over, she starts shooting, and she misses, and you're like, wait, you start running and you realize she's a really bad shot. So at that point you're like, oh, okay, well, she has a gun, but she's never gonna hit me, at least. But every time you run into her later on, you start booking it, because you're like, oh man, she's gonna start shooting at me at any point. And it's because Yuduru lets on that she knows that the player character is a quote-unquote monster. She knows that you are a vampire because during an event in common route, which we can talk about in the next route that we'll talk about in the final route, Yuduru sees the event where the two thugs, or like thieves, go ahead and they start trying to like shake down another girl on the mainland in Clear, one of the days when the player character just goes out for like a snack run, and he ends up saving the girl that's getting shook down by the two thieves. And he sees blood because he's a vampire, he gets like enraged, he gets like really like strong physically, but then at the same time he also like feels the need to like suck the blood from like the source that the blood is coming from. Yuduru happens to see that, like when she was about to go save the girl instead, but so she stands back, she sees the events unfold, and she sees that guy, he's a vampire, I need to kill him. And then so the whole route about Yuduru is her initially being that revealing the fact that she's a monster hunter, and she's been tasked by like a clan to go out to the island because there's reports of a monster, and that she needs to kill that monster in order to then like pass her exam that would allow her to become a fully fledged monster hunter. And then what happens is that she's like doesn't have any place to stay, so she's sleeping out like in the parks or whatever every single night, just surviving in the elements. And one day the grandpa for the player character bumps into Yuduru and gets a hold of like her situation, feels bad, and says, you know what, no, you, similar to Nonaka, he invites her in and says, you can stay at my place until you get a place of your own and you find your bearings. So Yuduru comes home one day and everyone in the household freaks out, and then they're like, huh, you're inviting a new girl into the house? Because they initially think the grandfather's like getting married. But Yudru walks in the door, player character's like, oh god, what have you done? She's gonna start shooting me with the gun. But over time, throughout that route, the player character and Yudru start to become family members in a way. They become very close and become like best friends in a way. What happens too is that they start their own club at the school for just the two of them, and things blossom over time. But towards the very end of the route, we still kind of get this sort of like the trauma of Yudru, where she starts getting these messages from her clan of like, how come you've been there for so long? It's about time that you go ahead and kill the monster. And what that comes up to, how both the player character and Yudru have to face when it comes to, now that they're a lot closer between one another, how are they going to settle this like dispute? Right. So Yudru route, I think, is quite good. It's quite emotional towards the end as well. There is a particular fight scene in it that goes on far too long and I think did kind of like knock it down a little bit, but at the same time I think it is really good still. I want to say we could probably put it like there, I want to say. And then lastly, we have quote unquote main girl Natsuki. So Natsuki is the little sister for the player character, but at the same time, it's revealed she's not actually like a little sister. She's like a cousin, but she says Oni-chan all the time. Natsuki is split into two portions as well, where we have the importance of that same sequence where the two thugs are shaking down a girl one day and the player character saves her, because after he saves her, he runs away because he's afraid of what that girl is going to think. But because it's dark enough, he's hoping that she didn't see his face. She doesn't think that, oh god, this person is like crazy, that they went and did all this stuff. He like sucked the blood of like these people or whatever. But what happens is, literally like I think like a day or two later, Natsuki convinces the player character to go ahead and join in on her club, where they're going to go to the swimming club. And upon going to the swimming club, they bump into that same girl that the player character saved. And so the player character is like freaking out. He's like, oh god, how did I bump into her? She was on the mainland. What is she doing over here? It's like, and then what happens is over time, that girl, that's not Natsuki, is getting pushed really hard by the swimming instructor, because she used to be this like, I think like silver medal swimmer in like a certain sort of like, what would be the word of like portion or like regional swimming tournament, and so she could potentially push even further and go on to do even greater things in a career for swimming. So the teacher knows that and is trying to like push her the most out of any of the other people in the club for swimming, and she doesn't like that. So she eventually gets fed up with the teacher and starts to say, you're pushing me too hard. I feel really like restricted. I'm willing to give up. I don't want to pursue swimming. And then she leaves. So she leaves the club. Natsuki feels really like she's responsible. She's the other girl's best friend at this point, and she's trying to do everything to make her feel better. So what happens is that the player character and Natsuki go and spend some time with this other girl, trying different things to try and like appease her when it comes to finding a new sort of hobby, even though you know deep down that her passion is for swimming. And what happens is that when they ask, after trying a couple things, the other girl says, I want to try romance. So what happens is that she says, one day there's going to be the like summer festival that's happening, and there's going to be a beauty pageant. So she applies for the beauty pageant and says one of these days she's going to, when the beauty pageant happens, she's going to go up on stage and she's going to profess her love to a boy that helped her when she was in trouble. And main character is like kind of like, oh no, and it's because at some point the girl ends up realizing that, hey, the main character was the person that saved me, and so she confesses her love to the player character in front of like a massive audience, and they end up going out together. So Natsuki still is not like the main center of that first half of the route. And what happens is we go through the route, we eventually realize that this is all a farce. The main character, being a vampire, he doesn't really feel emotions. He doesn't particularly feel attracted to this girl. And so one of these days they go out to like on a date, and he says, it's done. We're over. We're through. I don't feel confident dating you anymore. We both know that this is just a farce. You're doing it to try and shirk what you really are passionate about, which is swimming. So you need to go ahead and realize that. And so that first portion of the route comes to a conclusion. The girl ends up reconciling with the swimming instructor. Everyone like starts clapping because they all are like rooting for her, and that is when we finally move on to actually Natsuki route, which is kind of like delving on some more of like true route kind of stuff, where we learn a lot of lore behind the island that Clear takes place on, learning lore about like how different kinds of people come to the island, seeing lore regarding like the hill, which is an important place within Clear, and then also having little bits of romance. Natsuki route, I think, is a pretty impactful route. At the same time, though, it is separated to where a good chunk of that like first half of her route that I was describing happens alongside during common route. So her route in particular might feel a little bit less dense when you're reading it, but at the same time, overall, I do think it is quite solid for what it is. There's not too much romance, if I was to say, because you do end up dating Natsuki on her route at some point. It's just that it takes a while to get there. I want to say Natsuki route is probably above Haruno at least. You'd probably put like under Rin, I want to say. And then her route is probably the route that leads into the quote-unquote true route, which is not a route, it's like an ending. That's why I didn't put it on this list. That's maybe like 20-30 minutes long, but it is very heavily emotional, and the impact of that ending does rely very heavily off of reading Natsuki's route, which is fine because you don't unlock it until you've read all the routes anyways. But yeah, Natsuki route, I want to say, is really solid. So I don't think I put any of the Clear routes in B tier, huh? That should be all of them. Now, I realize that this is already still somehow like an hour and a half, even though it's far less routes than what I did last time. Hopefully you guys enjoyed my inner, like, deeper ramblings on each and every single dedicated route that I talked about this time. And I guess I do have still some time to go around and kind of tweak things. So I want to say, like, I don't know, like, last time I think I saw a couple routes and I was like, yeah, there's no way I put, like, Chihaya in B, right? Like, I feel like Chihaya could probably go much higher. Same thing for, like, this one, I think is probably lower. So I think if we were to move Chihaya up, we could probably put it, like, right there. And then we move this one maybe down to, like, probably into B tier, like around there. I remember, so this is Refrain. I almost think this could probably go lower too, I'm not gonna lie. Like, this could probably go like here. What else could we move around? I think like S tier is quite solid for what it is. A tier, I think I want to move this down probably a little bit as well. I don't think too highly of it. I want to say we could probably put that like around here, and then Do we want her Fuko in A tier? I could probably keep Fuko in A tier. And then B tier. So we have Tai Senpai at the top of B now. Is there anyone else that's like more closer to the top? I think B tier is still mostly fine as is. And then C. Trying to think, was there any other like routes that I just immediately was looking back on and be like, whoa, why did I put it like so low or so high? I think this is mostly fine. I won't lie. We didn't touch anything for D tier for this video. But yeah, I think this is going to be the second iteration of my visual novel route tier list. Hopefully you guys enjoyed watching, and hopefully it wasn't too long this time around. I'll probably leave the outro to future me, because I imagine there's a fair bit that I would want to say after all the editing has been done. And unfortunately, I made some of that editing a little harder for myself by forgetting to click record when I had a little bit of a technical difficulty around the hour-and-a-half mark, or like an hour and 10-minute mark, when I was talking about Miki. So hopefully, I didn't have too many issues. So I'll go ahead and I'll lead into hopefully future Wave, and he will provide you guys with the outro. So this has been Present Wave, signing off. Thank you guys for watching. I've been Wave, and I will see you next time. Alright, I'll try to keep things brief. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the layout that I decided to go with for this iteration of a tier list video. Took a lot longer when it comes to editing wise than my previous tier lists. Hopefully the work that I put in paid off. Figured it would be kind of interesting to try and have both the tier list itself alongside some snippets of gameplay. Sorry if there wasn't gameplay throughout the entirety of the hour and 40 minutes of the video, but I figured at that point it would probably become too excessive and would take far too long to go through and grab gameplay for each and every single dedicated route. That being said, hopefully, it was quite handy to have as far as being able to see the name of the character, like the character name for that route, alongside what game they're from, what like consoles or platforms that game is playable on, alongside what language it is available in, etc, etc. You have the music there as well in case anyone is curious. But yeah, after all that editing, let me know if you guys enjoyed it or not, or if you think I should just go back to the previous way that I did it. Either way is fine by me. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the tier list in full. Thank you guys for sticking around until this point. I've been Wave, and I will see you next time.